What would you do if you saw a judge cruelly mocking a homeless veteran in the middle of a courtroom? The scene that unfolded that cold November morning at the Denver Municipal Court would leave anyone in shock. Judge Morrison, known for his stern demeanor and superior attitude, was about to experience one of the most humiliating moments of his career. Standing before him was a man around 65 years old, dressed in tattered clothes with an unshaven face, nervously waiting for his turn to speak. No one in the courtroom could have imagined that this encounter would forever change the lives of everyone present. The courtroom was packed with lawyers, law students, and curious onlookers attending the morning hearings. The heavy air carried the scent of cold coffee and tension as people whispered about the day's cases. The veteran, who had only identified himself as Henry, was being charged with loitering after he was found sleeping in a public park. His hands trembled slightly. No one could tell if it was from the cold or the nerves as he clutched a plastic bag holding his few belongings. Judge Morrison flipped through the documents with disdain, clearly irritated at having to deal with yet another homeless case. "So, Mr. Henry," the judge said with a sarcastic smile, emphasizing the name as if it were a joke, "I see here you've turned our beautiful municipal park into your private residence." "How convenient!" The audience chuckled nervously, some visibly uncomfortable with the judge's tone. The veteran kept his head down, but his blue eyes glowed with an intensity few noticed. There was something in that gaze, unexplored depths, untold stories that could astonish anyone. But the judge had no idea who he was truly dealing with. The court clerk, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, watched the scene with growing discomfort. She had witnessed many cases like this over the years, but something about this veteran deeply intrigued her. Perhaps it was the upright posture he maintained despite his current condition, or the respectful way he addressed everyone, even as he was treated with contempt. There was a dignity in his movements that starkly contrasted with his deteriorated appearance. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off him, sensing she was about to witness something extraordinary, something that would forever change her view on rushed judgments. Judge Morrison continued his relentless verbal attack, unaware that he was digging his own professional grave. "Tell me, Henry, what's your excuse this time? Lost your job? Drinking problem? Or just decided working is too hard?" Each word was delivered like a sharp blade, cutting not only the veteran but also the patience of many in the room. The man remained silent, his fists subtly clenched at his sides, breathing deeply as if battling something far greater than public humiliation. A storm was forming behind those blue eyes, and the judge was completely oblivious to the danger approaching. "Your Honor," Henry murmured with a hoarse voice, "I served my country with honor and—" But he was harshly interrupted by the judge, who slammed his gavel down with excessive force. "Oh, of course, another veteran story. You people always use that as an excuse, don't you?" Sarcasm dripped from every syllable as Morrison leaned back in his chair with an air of superiority. The audience began to stir, some visibly outraged by the inhumane treatment. Sarah, the clerk, clenched her fists under the table, feeling a mix of anger and second-hand shame. She had served in the military decades ago and knew a real soldier when she saw one. The veteran lifted his head slightly, and for a brief moment, his posture completely shifted. It was as if decades of military discipline had reawakened in his tired body, transforming him into something far greater than he appeared to be. "Sir," he said with a firmness that sliced through the air, "I'm not asking for pity. I'm only—" Once again he was interrupted, this time by a cruel laugh from the judge. "You're only what? Hoping I'll feel sorry for another failure who can't adapt to civilian life?" The silence that followed was deafening, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Something was about to explode, and everyone could feel the electric tension in the air. A young lawyer in the front row noticed something others had missed, a small scar on the veteran's neck, partially hidden by his unkempt beard. It was a specific kind of mark he had only seen once before, in a documentary about special military operations. His heart began to race as he noticed other details. The way the man held his hands, always ready for action, and how his eyes constantly scanned the environment, even while appearing submissive. "My God," he whispered to himself, "who is this man really?" The answer to that question was about to shock not only the arrogant judge, but the entire legal community of the city. What Judge Morrison didn't know was that he was publicly humiliating a man whose name had once been whispered through the halls of the Pentagon decades earlier. Henry subtly adjusted an old dog tag hidden beneath his torn shirt, an unconscious gesture that Sarah caught out of the corner of her eye. The clerk leaned forward, trying to decipher what she had just seen, when she noticed the veteran walking with a slight limp in his right leg, not from age or weakness, but the kind that comes from combat injuries. Her years in the military had taught her to recognize the signs, and every new detail deepened her curiosity about the true identity of the man being treated like garbage. "Continuing with this farce," growled the judge, "I'm issuing the maximum penalty for loitering and contempt of court, 30 days in jail and a $1,000 fine." The sentence echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, triggering outraged murmurs among the audience. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was something different in them, a cold determination that sent chills down Sarah's spine. The veteran stepped forward, his posture shifting gradually from submissive to something she had only ever seen in elite soldiers. "Your Honor," he said, his voice now laced with decades of command and authority, "you might want to reconsider your decision." The shift in the veteran's voice was so dramatic that even Judge Morrison stopped flipping through his papers. There was something in that tone that cut through arrogance, like a finely honed blade, casting a deadly silence across the courtroom. Henry was no longer hunched or hesitant. He stood tall, like a tower, radiating a presence that completely took over the room. "Reconsider?" the judge scoffed nervously, but for the first time his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. The veteran kept his gaze locked on the magistrate, a gaze that had stared down situations far more dangerous than a municipal courtroom. Sarah felt a chill crawl down her spine as she noticed even more revealing details. The veteran's hands, though dirty, bore specific calluses she knew well, marks left by years of handling specialized military equipment. His breathing remained controlled and steady, even under extreme pressure, something only highly trained soldiers could maintain. "Judge," Henry said with unsettling calm, "you're making a mistake that could cost you dearly." The threat wasn't explicit, but the weight behind the words caused several lawyers to shift uncomfortably in their seats. What happened next left the entire courtroom in a state of absolute shock. Henry slowly reached into the inner pocket of his tattered jacket, a movement that instantly caused 2 courtroom guards to tense up. "With your permission, Your Honor," he said with a cold politeness that stood in stark contrast to the treatment he had received. Judge Morrison, now visibly uneasy, nodded hesitantly. The veteran pulled out a worn leather wallet, so old it looked like it had endured decades of hard use. When he opened it, a small golden medal slipped out and hit the floor with a metallic chime that echoed through the courtroom like distant thunder. The young reporter, who had come to cover routine court cases, nearly dropped her notepad when she saw what had fallen. Sarah quickly stood up from her desk, her eyes wide with recognition and horror at what she was witnessing. "My God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. The medal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and even from a distance, some of the veterans in the room could identify its importance. Judge Morrison, however, was completely lost, utterly clueless about the meaning of that small golden object that had just turned the entire atmosphere electric. The final confrontation was about to erupt as Henry slowly bent down to pick up the medal, each movement infused with a dignity that sliced through the judge's arrogance like a blade. "This medal," he said, rising with the posture of a soldier at full attention, "was awarded to me by the President of the United States in 1973. His words dropped into the room like bombs, sending shockwaves through everyone present. Judge Morrison blinked in confusion, still failing to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding before him. But Sarah had immediately recognized the shape and distinctive gleam of the medal. It was something only the bravest among the brave could receive. "Your Honor," Henry continued, his voice now radiating decades of command and unquestionable authority, "you just called a Medal of Honor recipient a failure and a bum." The silence that followed was so intense, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights could be heard. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States, awarded only to those who risk their lives above and beyond the call of duty. Judge Morrison's face began to lose color as reality slowly pierced through his arrogant mind. The entire courtroom was now on its feet, many with tears in their eyes, witnessing a moment that would forever shift their understanding of snap judgments and the true meaning of honor. What happened next would leave everyone in the courtroom questioning everything they thought they knew about the man before them. Henry wasn't just holding the Medal of Honor. He reached back into his wallet and pulled out an old, time-yellowed military document. "Your Honor," he said, his voice now echoing with absolute authority. "My name isn't just Henry. I am General Henry Ghost Morrison, and I believe we're related." Judge Morrison felt as though the world had stopped spinning. His own last name, spoken aloud by the man he had just publicly humiliated, formed an impossible connection that made his blood run cold. Sarah covered her mouth, realizing she was witnessing not just a shocking twist, but a family reunion no one could have seen coming. "My younger brother," the general continued, his eyes fixed on the now pale judge, "was always good at judging others. I wonder if he still remembers the boy who used to play soldier in the backyard, dreaming of being a hero like his older brother." The revelation exploded through the room like a grenade, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Judge Morrison, the same Morrison who had cruelly mocked the veteran, was now face to face with the brother he had believed to be dead in Vietnam over 50 years ago. The irony was so brutal and poetic, it felt like a scene ripped from a movie. The man who had humiliated a war hero was, in truth, humiliating his own brother, a ghost from the past, returning not just to confront his arrogance, but to shatter his entire sense of identity. Judge Morrison's reaction was devastating to witness. His face flushed from white to red, his hands trembled uncontrollably as he tried to process that the bum he had just humiliated was his own brother. Henry, you were dead," he stammered, his voice now cracked and desperate. "We got the notice. We held the funeral. Mum cried for years." The general stood motionless, watching his younger brother's emotional collapse with an expression that mixed deep pain with bitter disappointment. The entire courtroom was hypnotized, witnessing a family drama that transcended anything they had ever seen inside a court of law. Sarah quickly called the mayor's office, knowing the news would spread like wildfire across the city within minutes. A war hero, presumed dead, had returned only to find that his own brother had become the very kind of man he once fought to protect. Someone who judged the vulnerable without even trying to understand their stories. 52 years, the general said, his voice carrying decades of loneliness and suffering. 52 years wandering this country, trying to find my place after losing everything in the hell of Vietnam, and my own brother treats me like garbage. The accusation cut through the air like a blade, leaving Judge Morrison utterly shattered before the entire room. The full story of General Henry Morrison finally came to light, revealing decades of heroism and tragedy that left the entire courtroom in complete silence. He had been captured by the Viet Cong in 1971 during a covert mission to rescue American POWs, remaining in captivity for 3 years under inhumane conditions. "They tortured me, broke my bones, kept me in a cell smaller than a bathroom," he said, his voice echoing decades of pain. "But I never gave up my men. I never betrayed my country." When he finally escaped in 1974, he learned he had been declared dead. His family had moved on, and the world he once knew was gone. The Medal of Honor had been awarded posthumously, based on reports from his last mission before capture. Returning to America had been more brutal than war itself. Without a family, without an official identity, without records to prove he existed, Henry wandered the country for decades, battling war trauma, trying to rebuild a life that had been erased from history. "I served this country with every fiber of my being," he said, locking eyes with his brother. "And when I finally came home, I found my own family had forgotten me. The world had moved on without me." Sarah was now crying openly, as was half the courtroom, realizing they had not only witnessed the humiliation of a hero, but the reunion of a man with a past that had been buried alive by bureaucracy and time. What happened in the minutes that followed would forever change not only the lives of the Morrison brothers, but the entire community of Denver. Judge Morrison stepped down from his bench with tears streaming down his face, walking slowly toward the brother he had believed dead for 50 years. "Henry, I'm sorry," he murmured, reaching out trembling hands. "I became everything you fought to protect this country from, someone who judges without knowing, who humiliates the vulnerable." The general looked deeply into his younger brother's eyes, and for a moment that felt eternal, time stood still. Then slowly, he reached out and touched his brother's face. "We all lose our way sometimes, little David. The question is whether we're willing to find our way back." But the final surprise had yet to come. Sarah, who had been observing everything with growing recognition, finally stood and approached the two men. "General Morrison," she said, her voice trembling, "I served under your command in Vietnam. I was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, your communications officer." The circle closed in almost mystical fashion. The court clerk who had recognized the signs of an elite soldier was, in fact, one of his former subordinates, who had spent decades searching for him after he was declared dead. "Sir," she said, saluting, "your men never stopped looking for you. We knew you were alive." The reunion of three souls that fate had separated and then reunited in a Denver courtroom created a moment of redemption so powerful it changed not only their lives, but the entire room's understanding of honor, family, and second chances.